And if that's all going, can we get my PowerPoint up and ready to go? I'm going to... And this is, in the book of Joshua, 7 chapters and a whole lot of land borders, cities being divvied out, and all kinds of things. So I wonder if you want to find page 230, I'm going to just read a few sentences from chapter 15 to get us started. Page 230, if you've got one of the church Bibles. If you've got one of your own Bibles, you'll have to work out what page that's on. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 15. Here's what it says. The land allotted to the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. Their southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea, crossed south of the Scorpion Pass, continued on to Zin, and went over to the south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it ran past Hezron up to Adar and curved around to Karka. It then passed along to Asmon and joined the Wadi of Egypt, ending at the Mediterranean Sea. This is their southern boundary. The eastern boundary is the Dead Sea, as far as the mouth of the Jordan. The northern boundary started from the Bay of the Sea at the mouth of the Jordan, went up to Beth Hogbar, and continued north of Beth Araba to the stone of Bohan, son of Reuben. Boundaries can be pretty boring, can't they? Maybe if I read slowly through all of these chapters, 60-70% of you might be asleep by the end. Maybe that's because you're so unholy. Or maybe it's because, actually, I'm that boring that half of you are asleep anyway, normally when I preach. But that's the problem, isn't it? We can read through this, and maybe if you've ever done that kind of, I'm going to read through the Bible in a year, and maybe you've managed to get past those kind of long bits of law in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and you've got to Joshua, and there's loads of excitement, and then you get to these chapters, and you're like, another place that I don't know, another city I've never heard of, another land border that It is boring, isn't it? Because it seems a million miles away. There's a picture of the land and how it's all divided up. But what's that got to do with us? But what if I told you actually that it was the beechwood that was being divvied up? And it wasn't just the beechwood being divvied up to some other people, it was to you. And I said, oh, and the Hawkins, you get all of the land from First Ave down to the second bit of Fifth, and the Smarts, you get all of St Oswald's, and suddenly that matters, doesn't it? Because suddenly it's to do with you, and it's places that you know and you have been and that you have set foot on and walked past. And you see, that's the thing. That's what's going on here in these chapters of Joshua. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of those ancient Israelites. This is their land. This is what God has given them. This is the place that they have battled for. The place that God has been promising them for generations. They've walked these streets. They've been past these towns. And you see, we will take this in a big sweep. But the big thing of all these chapters, as this land is divided up for the ancient Israelites, is that God has given you this land. And so they have that question, will you take hold of it? You see, for the Israelites, they've come in, and we've heard over the chapters of Joshua, they've conquered loads of the land, haven't they? As chapter 12 ended, it seems pretty much like it's a done deal. They've taken most of what is here, but there is still a little more to go. They've gone sort of 3/4 of the way. Will they take hold of that last little bit? Will they keep on trusting the Lord who has given them victory so far? That's a big question. But it's the same question that we're being asked today as Christians. Not because this little pocket of land in the Middle East of ancient Israel is the land that God has promised to us. Actually, no, that is just a shadow of a much bigger promise that God has made to his people. A promise that one day the whole world will be ours. that God has said he will remake the heavens and the earth, and every believer, every person that has put their trust in the Lord Jesus will have a place in that perfect new world. But the question for us is the same question as those Israelites. That is what God has done. That is what God has promised. Will we take hold of it? See, the promise of Christianity isn't just a kind of spiritual heaven when we die, but is a resurrected body, a physical life on a real, remade, perfect world, better than we can even imagine. It's the promise on offer for anybody who puts their trust in Jesus. We have to choose whether we will take hold of it or not. Will we trust what God has said, what God has promised? So as we step back to these chapters, let me give you a bit of an overview. You see, God is dividing up this land that he has promised. I don't know how clearly you can see that red. Sorry, on my computer it was easy to see. It might be harder there. But that is the big structure of what is going on in these chapters. And first of all, we're given a bit of an introduction before they go into all of the detail. And I'll read those verses of chapter 13. So if you want to flick, we're going to do a bit of flicking through all of these chapters. If you want to just listen, that's fine. If you want to follow along, that's fine. So back to page 228. And chapter 13, verses 1 to 7 say this. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of the land to be taken over. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Girgashites, from the river Shihor to the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron in the north, all of it counted as Canaanite, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. The territory of the Avites to the south, all the land of the Canaanites, from Arah of the Sidonians as far as Aphek and the border of the Amorites, the area of Bybos, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal-Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo-Hamath. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Mithrapoth-Maim, that is all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. So be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh." You see, that's an introduction to what's going to be going on. The Lord is speaking to Joshua. He's basically saying, look, you've done brilliantly so far. You've taken this much of the land, but here is what is still to do. And he's not even saying, so buck up, get on with it. Look at what he said in verse 6. I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. God is giving them this land. And so they are simply told, well, divide it up between them so that you know when this land is taken, which tribe has which part. That is the introduction of that first bit that's going on. And then so in that next section from verse 8 of chapter 13 to chapter 13 to the end of the chapter, we're told about the divvying up of east of the Jordan, which was land that had been already conquered about 5 or so years before under Moses. So I don't think if you remember at the beginning of the book of Joshua, they're just about to enter the promised land to cross the Jordan River. But because of the unbelief of the Israelites before, a whole generation had passed away outside of the main bit of the land, including Moses. But those first little bits, and we cover 2.5 tribes, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, had taken some of the land on the east of the Jordan. And that's what's recapped there in chapter 13. And then once you get to chapter 14, verse 1, to chapter 17, verse 8, we get the west of the Jordan. But again, that's the land that has already been conquered. So that's the land that they've conquered in chapter 1 to chapter 12 of the book of Joshua. And you get 2.5 more tribes will have that land divvied out. The tribe of Judah, and then 2 of the tribes of Joseph's sons, Ephraim, and then the other half of Manasseh. In some ways, if you're not interested in details, don't worry too much about that. But if some people like to make sure they've got all of that stuff, so hopefully that's on there for you. And so far, of the land that has been conquered, 5 tribes have their land. And that means there are still 7 left to get the land that they have been promised, because there are 12 tribes of Israel. And so from chapter 18, verse 1, to chapter 19, verse 50, you get the rest of that land west of the Jordan that has not been conquered, the unconquered lands. that will be given to Benjamin and Simeon and Zebulun and Issachar and Asher and Naphtali and Dan. So in fact, let me flick on to chapter 18 and read you a little bit of that. Chapter 18, verse 1, the whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. So Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, hath given you? Appoint 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it, according to the inheritance of each. Then they will return to me. You are to divide the land into 7 parts. Judah is to remain in its territory on the south, and the tribes of Joseph in the territory on the north. After you've written the descriptions of the 7 parts of the land, bring them here to me, and I will cast lots for you in the presence of the Lord. The Levites, however, do not get a portion among you, because the priestly service of the Lord is their inheritance. And Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have already received their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan. Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave it to them. Hopefully you're still following. So they're there. They've got this land that hasn't been conquered, and they are being told, well, go and survey it. Go and walk through it all, divvy it up between the tribes, and then we will cast lots to see which tribe gets which part. Actually, the land is so subdued before them that they can go out, 3 from each tribe, and they can walk freely through the land, dividing it up, because the inhabitants are so frightened of the Israelites that they won't even dare fight against little groups of 3 of them. Because God has already given them this land, they simply have to take hold of it. The west of the Jordan, not yet conquered, but essentially God is saying that's just a formality. All you need to do is go into it. And so our whole thing ends with a 1-sentence summary at the end of chapter 19, verse 51. Flick over again if you want. These are the territories that Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel assigned by lot at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And so they finished dividing the land. See, all of these chapters are about this land, this promised land that God has already given to them, and that question of will they actually take hold of it as they have been commanded to? Will they trust what God has said? God has said, I've given you this land. Will they trust it? Will you take hold of it? And ultimately, that's a matter of faith, isn't it? It's a matter of trusting God or not. Will they trust the God who has been with them so far? If you know anything about the history of the Israelites, you know that they're not very good at trusting God, but you also know that God has given them 1,000,001 reasons why they can trust him. He has blessed them, he has protected them, he has given them victory after victory after victory in the most incredible ways, hasn't he? Maybe you remember the plagues in Egypt. Maybe you remember the parting of the Red Sea. Maybe you remember the walls of Jericho coming crashing down. God has given them every reason to trust him, but they are still asked that question. Will they trust him? Will they have faith in the God who has given them this land? Will they take hold of what he has promised? And actually, that's a big question we need to be asking today. Will I trust the Lord? Will I trust it when Jesus says, my death is enough for you? Will I really believe it when Jesus says it is better to be a servant in the house of the Lord than to have all the riches that this earth can offer? Will I trust God that Jesus Christ is the only way to have life forever with him? Well, that's the big question going on, but if you did stop and read through these chapters in detail, you would realize very quickly, and maybe it's not a surprise to you if you've been a Christian for more than 5 minutes, there are hints of problems already. Because the Israelites, just like us, are a bunch of foolish, sinful, selfish people. And so every tribe that has already been given some of the land and already taken that land, there are hints of problems. So flick back again to chapter 13. And let me read verse 13 to you. Buts are always important in the Bible. But the Israelites did not drive out the people of Geshur and Maachah, So they continue to live among the Israelites to this day. Turn over to chapter 15 and verse 63. Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. And then 16, chapter 10. They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. You see, God had said, when you take this land, you need to get rid of all of the inhabitants. That if you let them stay in whatever capacity, they will turn you away from trusting and following me. So for your own holiness, you need to get rid of them. And all the way along, there are hints of these problems. They chose not to do it. They couldn't do it. They decided to make them slaves instead of sending them out. Ultimately because the Israelites don't fully trust the Lord. Look on to chapter 17, verse 12. Yet the Manassites were not able to occupy those towns, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that region. See, when we read that, maybe we think, well, that's a bit harsh. They tried, but they weren't able to. They've got to have points for trying, right? But verse 13 shows actually the truth of their hearts. However, when the Israelites grew stronger, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. Remember, God has said he is going to win these victories. The only reason that they don't have success in the first place is because they're not trusting God. And here, even when they're strong enough that they can do what they want to these these outsiders, these Canaanites, they basically say, we could do what God said, but I've got a better idea. Let's not. Let's keep them as slaves instead. That'll be much better than listening to God. Of course, they probably don't say that out loud quite as bluntly, but that's what their actions show, don't they? God has said this. I'm going to do that instead. God has said, cast them out. I'm going to keep them here. They don't trust the Lord. There are hints at problems already. They're told God has given you this land. They're asked that question, will you take hold of it? And the sad answer is no. No, because ultimately they are more frightened of man than they have faith in God. But it's not all bad, actually. The book of Joshua is broadly encouraging. And in chapter 14 and 15, we are given a positive example to follow. We're given the example of Caleb. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble with this then. Oh, it's just being slow. There you go. Caleb, who is an example to follow. I wonder if you know who Caleb is. Caleb is one of the two faithful Israelites. Come back with me 45 years earlier on, and Moses is in charge of the Israelites. And they're on the edge of the promised land that God has promised them. And he says, go in and take this land. And the Israelites says, oh, it looks a bit big and scary. I know what we'll do. We'll send in 10 spies. Should have written that down, one of those two, into the land just to check it all out. And as they come in, and they look around and they see all of the inhabitants and they suddenly go, those are big guys. I don't think we could take them on. They're giants to us. And they come back in and they say, nah, God said that, but no, we're not going in there. Apart from two. Joshua, who's now in charge, and Caleb. Caleb is a faithful Israelite. They had said, the Lord has promised us this land so we can go and take it. But none of the other Israelites trusted them. None of the other Israelites trusted the Lord, except Caleb and Joshua. And so God said, well, none of you will take this land. None of you will set foot in this land apart from Caleb and Joshua. And Caleb knows it. Caleb knows he's been faithful and knows what God has promised. So listen to a few sentences from chapter 14 with me. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua, this is chapter 14, verse 6, at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people sink. I, however, followed the Lord wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Caleb trusts the Lord. He has trusted the Lord. He's got a long history of trusting the Lord. And here he is on the land, 85 years old, preserved by the Lord to take the land that the Lord has promised him. He knows that God has promised it, and he trusts God's promises. And so he says, go on, let me go and take it. I might be 85, but I can do it. And you know what? That's exactly what he does do. In faith, he trusts the Lord, so he takes hold of what God has promises. There is an encouraging example here for us to follow and for the Israelites to follow. But actually, there are plenty of causes for concern. Now, and one of those significant ones are Joseph, the people of Joseph, not the man. Joseph, the son of Jacob, had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And of the 12 tribes of Israel, those two got tribes instead of Joseph. So Joseph got two half-tribes. And so the people of Joseph, well, they're a cause for concern. Look on at chapter 17. Let me read from verse 14. The people of Joseph said to Joshua, why have you allotted us only one portion of land and one share for an inheritance? We're a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly. If you're so numerous, Joshua answered, and if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, then go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaites. The people of Joseph replied, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Beth-shan and its settlement and those in the valley of Jezreel. But Joshua said to the tribes of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, you are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one portion of land allotted to you, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its furthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out. You see, at first glance, maybe we think they've got a fair question. They're saying, look, you've not given us enough land. Seems legitimate. But hold on, God knows everything. Are they really saying that God doesn't know what he's doing there? Because that is what they're saying. No, God has given them plenty of land. They just don't have the faith to see it. Ultimately, behind their questions is a distrust in the Lord and his promises, because they've seen this land, and actually their true fears come out, don't they? It's the Canaanites with the chariots of iron that they're frightened of. They are more frightened of men than they have faith in God. And Joshua basically gives them no thrift. He says, no, you will take it. You can take it. The unspoken word is, well, because the Lord has promised this. You just need to trust him. But for the Israelites, not just the people of Joseph, but all of them, as they stand and as generations after read this, the question is the same. Will they trust the Lord? God has given them this land. Will they take hold of it? God has been faithful this far. Will they trust him to keep on being faithful? It's the question for the later generations as well. Once this land has been more taken, we have already had those glimpses that plenty of other nations were not driven out as they should have been. And that the Israelites, generation after generation, were tempted to follow after the pretend gods of the Canaanites instead of the one true God of the whole earth. And as they should have looked at this and realized, what will we do? God has given us this. Will we choose to follow him? Will we choose to take hold of what God has promised? Or will we ultimately go chasing off after the false promises of these other nations and these other gods? Will we be like Joseph and fear men more than we have faith in God? Or like Caleb, who, even though he was old, no offense to all of you older folk, but trusted God's promises. It's the challenge for the Israelites and the challenge for us. God has given us this land. Will we take hold of it? You know, it's not the Middle East. Like I said, it is the whole world. Do we really believe that God has promised a new heavens and a new earth and a place in it for us? And if we believe that, will our lives show that? In the Number One Life group, we've been looking at some of the things that Jesus said. And recently we were looking at when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I just want to read a few sentences from that chapter in John, where that comes from, chapter 14. Because Jesus is giving us a picture of what God has promised us. Here's what it says. He says this to his disciples: do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place I am going. See, Jesus is giving us a picture of what life forever with him will be like. And it's this picture of this kind of glorious mansion house with countless rooms, and everyone who believes in him will have a place to live, will have a room in that palace. That is God's picture, or one of God's pictures, of the new heavens and the new earth. God has given it to you. If you are a Christian, you have a room in God's palace. Will you take hold of it? Jesus says the way to get there. When they say, what's going on? He says, I am the way. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the truth. He is the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is the only way to get to this promised land. The only way to, we use lots of different words for it, the promised land, heaven, the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. They're all pictures of the same thing, of God's great promise. The only way there is through Jesus. Will we trust in him? Will we believe God's promises and so take hold of what he promises? Not by trying harder, not by going through a whole load of rituals and routines, simply by trusting in Jesus alone. Believing what God says means believing those words, doesn't he? The only way to that promised land is through Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life, he says. No one comes to the Father except through me. The way to take hold of God's promises, of this wonderful land that God gives us, is through Jesus alone. But of course, we are also invited to put that faith into action. Caleb's that brilliant example of that, isn't it? In contrast to those people of Joseph, Caleb trusts God's promises, and that doesn't lead him to sort of sit back and say, well, I'm old, so someone else sort this out, and then you can just wheel me in eventually. No, he says, God has promised me this. I trust him, so I'm going. I'm 85 years old, but I am going to take over those Amalekites. He sees the scale of the task, and he trusts God. In contrast to those people of Joseph who see the scale of the task and fear the men in front of them. That's what it looks like to put our faith into action, doesn't it? To not say, oh, life's going to be easy now, I'm a Christian. But to say, there's going to be all kind of obstacles and difficulties in my way, but I trust that God will lead me safely home. God will keep me every step of the way. I do not need to fear man. I do not need to fear whatever's in front of me. I'm speaking to myself as much as to anybody else, because isn't the temptation to fear what's in front of us? When more and more of our world says all of the things that Christianity teaches is rubbish, that you're foolish to believe that there's a God at all, You're especially foolish to believe in the God of the Bible, who seems to smite people in one moment and forgive people in the next. When people go around and say, no, in the name of tolerance, you can't say that there's only one way to God. Or who say that, actually, how dare you say that what the Bible teaches about sex and relationships and gender and identity are right. That's not just foolish and wrong. People will say that is bigoted and evil. Actually, will I fear man more than I have faith in God in those moments? It can be really tempting to stay quiet, to hide away, rather than to try to speak up lovingly and gently and kindly, but also clearly for what the Bible teaches. No, I need to let my faith in God be bigger than my fear of man. I need to have confidence that God has given us this land, and so I can trust him as I take hold of it. Actually, doesn't that mean that we should be bolder in going out with the good news of Christianity? Jesus is the only way. So shouldn't we share that with our friends and neighbours more and more? Doesn't it also mean that I should be comfortable in forgiving people who have hurt me, because I know I have been forgiven so much more? That I should be generous, I should be loving, I should be kind, I should be seeking to show and grow all of those fruits of the Spirit, looking for ways to show and live my trust in God day by day by day, to grow my trust in God day by day by day, to look back on what he has already done, most clearly to look back at the cross where that victory is won, but also look through his faithfulness to me and my friends and my family and Christians generation after generation, so that I can set foot the next day trusting God, and the next day trusting God. Ultimately, we do want to be following the example of Caleb, who was able to say, I have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. And then that's what led him into action to go and take hold of the land that God had promised. So I'm going to pray that for me and pray that for all of you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you have promised us a perfect land, a wonderful place in your kingdom forever, a remade heavens and earth, a perfect world where we can be with you forever. Lord, give us the faith to take hold of that, to trust in Jesus alone, who is the way. And please give us wisdom and boldness to go out in that faith, trusting you and sharing that news with others, inviting others to come into your kingdom, to receive your rescue, to trust in you alone. Amen.